welcome to the video. My name is Maze, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make wooden knives or swords that you could use for toys or props, or as in this case, costumes. So for this Halloween, my cousin's sons wanted to dress up as Peter Pan. One of them's going to be the regular Peter Pan, and the other one's going to be the Shadow Peter Pan. So they needed some daggers, some Peter Pan daggers for their costumes, and so they came over so that I could show them how to make some. So the one on the right is the one I made to show them how to make theirs that they made. The two on the left, and they did about 80% of it. I did the dangerous parts, or the parts that there's one part specifically I'll tell you about that needs a little bit more skill, but for the most part they made them themselves. So I showed them how to make it, so now I'll show you. So let's make some dust. So here I'm milling the wood. You could buy it pre-milled. At Home Depot I know you can get poplar with 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch thicknesses. So you could do that if you don't have a table saw or a planer. But I recommend using basswood or poplar just because they're soft, light, and inexpensive woods. So the main thing you need is 1/4 inch thickness and 1/2 inch thickness. The width, I usually use about 2.5, and that's enough for most blade shapes. And as far as length, it depends on what size blade you want. Obviously here they're just little daggers, so I think I'm using 9 inches, but of course I'm making 3 of them, so it looks really long. If you're going to resaw your own wood, like you buy 3/4 inches and you're going to resaw yourself, I'd recommend making the 1/2 inch one that's a little bit thinner than the 1/4 inch. Is pretty much as thin as you want to go. The 1/2 inch one can be a little bit thinner. So after you get your wood, you're going to take your 1/4 inch thickness board and you're going to draw your blade shape on. I like to draw it on a piece of paper and then glue it. You're going to want to make a tang on your blade, which is going to go inside the handle. You want to make it like the same width as one of your chisels. In this case, the same width as my 1/2 inch chisel. And where it goes from blade to tang, that transition, you kind of want to have a triangular connection. It makes it a lot stronger than if you just have a right angle. It will be hidden by the hilt. So you can see kind of that triangular shape I have, and I'm taking the parts that I cut off the sides, and then this is where I'm going to make the inner layer of my hilt. And so I'm drawing the shape of the blade onto those and then cutting those off real quick. And then you can see kind of how the cross guard's going to go. Then I take my 1/2 inch board and I measure the length, and then I draw a line down the middle, and I do the same thing for the handle with the 1/2 inch board. And if you've seen my mallet video, which I'll leave a link to, I use the same technique. I'm going to glue the inside, what I like to call the spine, to one of the sides. I'm going to use the blade as my spacer. I'm going to clamp that down and leave it spaced out by the blade. I'm going to leave it clamped for about 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes I'm going to come back and I'm going to glue the other side to it. And then I'll leave it clamped in for about an hour. The glue sets after about 10 minutes, and so it will be set enough to where I could unclamp it, glue the other part, and clamp it in. But before you start actually working on it again, you want to wait about an hour. Then I'm going to take my blade and my handle pieces and mark the place where my tang will be. You know, you could just use your pencil and eyeball it, but I have, the fancy marking tools, so I end up using them. And then here's the one part that you kind of have to have a little bit of skill for. I'm kind of making a channel for the Tang to sit into. I did this one for them. I didn't think that they could do it correctly. One of them's like 13, the other one's 10, and I've cut myself on my chisels more than on anything else, so I went ahead and did this for them. You gotta take into account your own kids, and you know them and what they're capable of. They did do all the scroll saw work and most of the belt sander work that I'm going to be doing coming up. Those tools I think are relatively safe for kids. You can't really, cut off your fingers with them. You could hurt yourself, but teach them to respect tools, and they were able to handle it. So you gotta, to your own kids, you gotta take responsibility for them and do what you think they could handle. But I went ahead and did this because the tighter and cleaner this joint is, the stronger the knife is going to be. So you can see on this one side, I made the channel a little bit deeper than it is. That way I could shape the crossguard how I want and have some room to thin it out a little bit. So after I had the channel done and I had dry fit everything, I went ahead and glued the handle together, and using rubber bands as clamps here. So I have a video about 10 things you can buy at the 99-cent store that you could use in the workshop, and these rubber bands was one of those, so I'll leave a link to that video. But you just rubber band it, and you don't want to glue it together yet, but you want to make sure it fits. And so those are the three parts you have. You have your handle, your crossguard, and your blade. And as you can see, the crossguard, the sides are a little bit longer than the spine, so I cut it to length, cut it so it was nice and they were both the same distance from the center, and then I cut it down so that it was flush on the bottom. This is very thick. This is putting the scroll saw to its limits. You want to go really slow and don't force it, because it's like 1.25 inches thick. That's pretty much pushing the limits of a scroll saw. So then I drew up the side profile of the crossguard. This is like the blade shape. This is completely up to you. This is I looked at some pictures of Peter Pan's daggers, and this is kind of the general shape that it was. So I drew that onto the side and then cut that out on the scroll saw. Again, this is a little thick for a scroll saw, and especially this blade, but I didn't want to switch out blades for just this one little cut, so I just went slowly and eased it in, and it worked out fine. And then I drew the kind of top or other profile that I wanted on there, and then this is a lot easier of a cut. You just use the flat side, the top side that's nice and flat, to rest on the scroll saw table, and you can cut it out. And then it's over to the belt sander to clean it up and smooth it out, round off all the edges as much as possible, and kind of finalize as much of this shape as I can. Some parts I won't be able to get to, so I'll have to go back over those with a hand file. So then it's time to shape the blade, so I'm just drawing a center line down the blade and then down the sides, and then kind of a line of how I'm going to transition that part. And then I shape it over at the belt sander. I'm not trying to really worry too much about it. Peter Pan's dagger is the funny thing about Peter Pan is he wields it like it's a real sword, but it looks like a toy knife, right? It's a small little kid's dagger, so you kind of want to make it look like a toy. We're not trying to make it look like an actual dagger, so it's very forgiving in how you shape it. The important thing though is to kind of roll over the sides. We don't want it sharp, and we want to take off the point. We're not trying to have them trip and fall and stab themselves. We just want them to have some fun. And then the last thing you need to do is to shape the handle. You could do pretty much anything you want. We pretty much just rounded it off, so it was an oval. We didn't really shape the handle too much. Again, we're trying to go for kind of a kid's toy type of dagger, so didn't need too much shape. But you can do whatever you want. Just make it comfortable in the hand and look how you want it. But you could really easily do it on a belt sander. You don't need a lathe or anything fancy to do something like this. And then we hand sanded it to 220, and then it was on to the staining. We used boiled linseed oil for the blades just to give it that light amber color. Basswood, it takes stain real well, so it gives you a lot of options as far as coloring goes. Poplar is pretty good too, so those are the two woods I would use. And then for the handles, I used a brown leather dye. For the shadow blade, we used black leather dye, and then for the regular Peter Pan blade, we used kind of a reddish, brownish one, and I just used brown on mine. And then we sprayed it with shellac. Didn't have the video of that, but we sprayed a few coats of shellac, and then we used a 5-minute epoxy to hold it all together. And that's the video. So thank you for watching. This is a great project for kids to get into woodworking. All you really need is a scroll saw. Everything we did with the belt sander you could do with some hand files if you don't have a belt sander. But a scroll saw is a very kid-friendly tool to get them started with. Use your own personal judgment to decide when you think your children could handle it, but when they're of the age to start working in the shop, scroll saw is a great tool to get them started with. And then you could easily do this in a day. They learn how to sand, they learn how to stain, and then they have a cool toy that they could play with and be proud of at the end of the day. So this is a great, I think, kids-friendly project. So get out there in your workshops and with your own kids and make your own dust.